Hey everyone, my name's Tranquility. Well, I usually only upload gameplay of me and my friends goofing around in Hunt. The most recent developer video and seeing how people have been torching every available forum out there, I wanted to contribute a measured response to what we've seen in the video, because there's quite a lot of really nice stuff in this update as well. There's definitely also some valid criticism to raise to some of the things they've announced in this video though. I hope to contribute some ideas and perspectives you may not have heard before. If you want to talk about it, leave a comment. You know how it goes on here. Starting off relatively tame, I'd argue, we're getting the witness trait back, which I personally really loved in the past events, as it rewarded you for playing around dead hunters' bodies. Now we can actually buy it with regular upgrade points. I'm hoping we see more experimentation with old and new traits in future updates, just like this. Because experiment they did. We now have a separation between Scarce and burn traits, which I think is pretty cool as well. Traits like Shadow and Shadow Leap not being removed on being down makes more sense to me personally, as they're not directly PvP related, and it was always really frustrating to lose a trait like Shadow just for being the first one to get shot from a bush. The burn traits, however, did get a new addition. Not from an old event, but an old trait which we have all grown to love and hate both. Necromancer. Necromancer will be a single-use trait, which is not stackable, unlike Remedy, Relentless, and Rampage. However, we will still be able to buy it for trait points, just as before in between games. After necroing a teammate once, the trait will be removed from your hunter, and from there on out, you'll have to risk your own life again to revive your teammates. Crytek also removed the HP cost for channeling a necro revive in return, though. For solos, the trait definitely changed quite a lot. While it's still a burn trait, necro reviving yourself will grant your hunter a full restoration effect, meaning that, based on my understanding how they worded it, if that solo is 1 HP away from being burned out and gets up, they will stand up with 150 HP regardless. This also saves solo players a trait slot, which was previously taken up by Resilience, as it's not needed anymore with the Banish effect. On top of that, the self-revive speed has also been increased, giving opponents less time to run up on a solo's body before they can get up again. In general, I like the idea of balancing traits through turning them into burn traits, and while Necromancer may have been a bold choice to test this on as a first trait to receive this nerf, it's a change that was in incredibly high demand from this community, so I understand why it was addressed like this, even if I personally may disagree with the reasons for nerfing Necromancer. However, I do want to critique that 4 trait points may be a little steep as a price for this now single-use trait. As a pretty PvP-focused player myself, I'd say I take around 3 to 4 moderately successful matches to level a hunter up to level 50, and I use Necromancer pretty much every single match, meaning that 4 matches will cost my hunter 12 or 16 trait points even. I'm worried that this will just lead to people relinquishing to play a hunter they lack trait points for to repurchase Necromancer with, leading to hunters being forced to take a break until Cherry has handed them out some more trait points. For solos, this is both a buff and a nerf in my opinion. Which one of the two has the bigger impact on solo gameplay is hard for me to tell personally, as I play solo very rarely. Death traps are now the definite counter to solos without antidote shots though. Although I have to say I personally find the banish a little more annoying to deal with than a solo getting up multiple times, just because of how much a hunter's power is diminished by being at less than 150 HP. A full health hunter usually poses much more of a threat than one that can get up multiple times. This also adds the interesting component that solo hunters, unless they have an unfortunate run-in with an immolator or fire ammo, will never have the need to banish a boss, since they are either completely out or will get a banish upon getting up. I'm also kind of curious whether this health restoration will have the same audio cue as the regular banish, making it even easier to locate a solo in the process of getting back up, even through walls with the lightning effect and sound. Plus, solos may now at any time disengage a situation where they lost health bars to let AI punch them to death or straight up blow themselves up to regain those bars and then continue fighting, without risking being one-tapped in an inopportune spot where getting up wouldn't be possible. Next, for the situation of stalemates, I find myself disagreeing with Crytek's opening statement for that segment. We'll give it a watch and then discuss why.
Over the last year, we have introduced more ways for players to get back into the fight after being downed. These changes have had a positive impact overall, but have also introduced many points of frustration and contributed to stalemate situations. Having reflected on your feedback and the available data, we are making adjustments to burning and revive mechanics to reduce stalemates and bring more decisive closure to player versus player fights.
Now, while I can't speak for all players and elos, in my experience, this has actually caused less stalemates. While I won't deny that stalemates have become somewhat of a problem that can really suck the fun out of a game, I don't think the revive and health restoration mechanics are at fault here. I've actually seen people more willing to be revived, even in risky situations, with the prospect of looting back a missing health chunk or banishing at one of the medkits during the last event, for example. Especially the long ammo meta, of course, contributing heavily to this. Being one tap to the chest does change most players' playstyle to a more passive role, out of fear of being a very easy kill. Crytek, however, has announced a faster burn rate for hunters in order to resolve stalemates through pressure on teammates to put out their teammates and revive them. Personally, I see this decision with the addition of limited Necromancer charges backfire, though. With Necro charges being a very limited resource among a trio now, and even more so duos, I'm afraid this will instead encourage people to aggressively hold downed hunters, as a shorter time investment until a hunter is burned out, paired with the chance of wasting a team's Necro charge when just hard scoping a body is a relatively risk-free investment compared to playing actively even while having one or more enemies downed. Peeking the alive teammates will simply become an unnecessary danger. Additionally, it's also conceivable that lone teammates who have run out of Necro charges and whose teammates are burned out will rather quickly run out of options other than just hunkering down inside a building or simply run away. I imagine especially random teams will notice quite the impact from increased burn timers, with random teams lacking unified communication, unlike trios playing together on Discord. With having recently buffed the fuses to now come in a bundle of 5, and the flare pistol still overpowering the choke bombs with 3 charges by default, I find Crytek's point that choke bombs, beetles, and choke bolts are the answer to the faster burn rate quite insulting. At the same time, it is incredibly funny that they used the wrong beetle for this video. Like, you have the image of the choke beetle lying around somewhere, I hope. Use it for this video. Why are you using the regular stalker beetle? Regardless, I don't think people should have to rely on either giving up their secondary weapon slot for a hand crossbow or bringing choke bombs plus a beetle just to match a singular tool slot. Especially with the decreased duration for choke clouds, which have now moved away from also partially being an area control tool to pretty much mostly just putting out fire, which I'm honestly really okay with. For the centered crosshair, there's really not much to say about it. It's optional. As long as the camera angle or positioning doesn't change in a gameplay relevant way, this is a huge win for many people who have been asking for this for quite some time by now. But now, for the part of the video that has caused the biggest outrage amongst the community, which is nothing to scoff at when we also have a huge necro change in the same video. The addition of bullet drop to the game while making all headshots lethal at all ranges. Everything is up in flames regarding this topic. Twitch chats, forums, private Discord servers, everyone is discussing the bullet drop mechanic and whether it belongs into Hunt or not, with old Crytek posts being dug up to directly compare the dev's original stance on it. I don't want to discuss whether bullet drop as a whole belongs in this game here, however. I just want to discuss whether what they have shown so far belongs into the game or not. First, let's look at this screenshot to fully understand what drop range actually implies as a stat. The two main things I want to focus on here is that bullet drop only becomes noticeable, whatever that means, after 25-50 meters, and that bullet weight and speed will determine its drop trajectory, meaning different trajectories for different types of custom ammo. From a gameplay perspective, I actually quite like the idea of making a distinction between ammo that's supposed to headshot, meaning less damage and higher speed with less drop, and ammo that's supposed to body tap with higher damage and other benefits like bleed or penetration, but less speed and more drop. We have had this in the game with Spitzer already, dealing less damage to the body, losing one-shot potential on a previously downed enemy, but also making shots easier to land. However, this does raise the question how important speed actually is in this equation. Keep in mind that barrel length and action type will also play into this stat. Luckily, we do have some data on a few guns regarding this stat, provided in a nicely condensed way by the Drippy Sink. Thank you very much. Here we can see that the Berthier having a faster bullet drop than the Martini, with both being long ammo and the Martini having a significantly slower bullet. That barrel size seems to be a pretty strong indicator as opposed to bullet velocity necessarily. The Springfield stats seem to corroborate this conclusion, meaning Mosin, Labelle, and Sparks might actually still be very fierce competitors for the meta, if not even more so than before. And with all of these three having a scoped variant as well, 2 of which also have access to Spitzer, I'm doubting that bullet drop will have as much of an impact on snipers as I have seen some people make it out to be. Scopes also usually greatly help with estimating bullet drop. Not only do you see exactly where your bullet lands if you stay in scope, but being further zoomed in, especially when only small adjustments for the bullet drop are needed, makes scopes incredibly more powerful compared to an iron sight variant. Not to mention that at long enough ranges, even with the now infinite headshot range, the iron sight / gun model will start to slowly obscure more and more of the player model being aimed at. Really far away snipers can use this greatly to their own advantage. How badly this can be exploited, though, is hard to tell without being able to test the actual drop. It really does not help that 25 to 50 meters is an incredibly vague value. Assuming this is talking about basic compact, medium, and long ammo, the flattened curve of compact ammo would suggest that the compact ammo is the one to reliably hit headshots even after 50 meters, or at 50 meters, with the increased drop range. Long ammo, on the other hand, would be all the way down at 25 meters, with medium ammo somewhere in between. This, at first glance, seems to push long ammo more so into a close-range weapon than the other weapons regarding headshot potential, while remaining the 2-tap power at medium to longer ranges, a body also, of course, being easier to hit with bullet drop than a head. Spitzer may form a reasonable exception to this rule. This again, however, still a lot of speculation on my part. One part that confused me, however, is whether these 25 to 50 meters also apply to the pistols shown in the video, or just the rifles. It was almost seem weird that a PAX pistol with a drop range stat of 10 meters can still reliably headshot up to 35 to 40 meters, if we're assuming the middle. At least the stat would be incredibly misleading then, the reliable range being up to 4 times as high as the drop range stat. It seems pretty easily misleading to me, especially to new players. If pistols indeed have a decreased reliable range, though, this would lead to an even worse problem: the gap. Something I haven't seen mentioned much, really. Well, what do I mean by that, though? For as long as I've played Hunt, there have been these two sides of the same coin. Rifle players calling shotgun players campers for not leaving the boss there, and shotgun players calling rifle players campers for waiting outside until someone comes out. Basically a tale as old as time. With the introduction of bullet drop, especially with a reliable range shorter than these 25 to 50 meters, but even with it, this would widen the gap even further. Pistols having a relatively short barrel and slow bullets would indicate that even with those 25 to 50 meters being accurate for pistols as well, they would definitely gravitate towards the lower end, towards an additional 25 meters. This, however, would logically motivate the rifle players to take their fight from positions where pistols are even less effective as the main ranged option for shotgun players. In turn, shotgun players would be discouraged from peeking and trying to face the rifle player, as they know they'll be at a major disadvantage having to account for bullet drop, while rifle players are within 50 to 70 meters, still relatively unbothered by it, which in turn would lead to more stalemates. Kind of ironic, really. But who knows, maybe a Centennial Shorty or Winfield Vandal meta could fix that as well. And yet again, this is still all up in the air with no more concrete values being shown. I want to get into some of the possible solutions for the things I've addressed in this video. Constructive criticism is, after all, only achieved through offering suggestions. Necromancer being a burn trait is something that will have to be tested for sure. Whether it actually increases the amount of short-lived stalemates in favor of burning someone and making sure they stay down is something I personally love to be proven wrong on. However, I think the trait cost buy mechanic is something that could definitely use some changing. As I've mentioned before, I just find it sort of unpleasant to eventually be forced to either retire a hunter I've had good matches with just because they ran out of trait points. While that does happen naturally over time, and yes, trait points can technically be farmed by selling your traits and killing meatheads, which isn't a great gameplay loop either though, I don't think it needs to be sped up by a single-use 4-cost trait. Maybe make it so the trait is only usable once during a round and replenishes after extracting, so no one has to put hunters aside for cherry to bolster their trait points over time. As for the burn buff, a reasonable counter mechanic to this without buffing chokes would be to add the trait Peacekeeper as a burn trait as well, with the feature to loot back bars being removed though. Make it expensive too if need be. I think this would reasonably decrease frustration with burning in the player base though. That way, winning a fight with 2 burnt out teammates actually lets you at least recover your hunters. Even better, make it so that downed person has to be the one with the trait in order to be picked up with Peacekeeper. That way you can let players decide themselves whether they want their hunters to be savable or would rather buff themselves by buying other traits. With all of them being at 50 HP, this also greatly reduces this team's competitiveness for the rest of the round. If there are still other teams around, that is. Having burned their Peacekeeper, they do need a banish and are unable to do the strategy again in the same game. Meaning a barely won fight is still impactful. While we did have a problem with people taking off to later revive their teammates with Peacekeeper during the last event, I think whether they run off to revive their teammates or run because both have been burned out in under 1 minute won't really make that much of a difference in game. At least as long as a banish is the only way to regain health bars in game, as opposed to during events where there are multiple banish methods. Last but definitely not least, the bullet drop. I see Crytek has two options to effectively deal with this current outrage. Of course, there are other ways too, but everything else is probably pretty shit. They give the community more data on how bullet drop actually works, for one, how it interacts with weapon variants and custom ammo. And two, they let us test it ourselves on the Hunt test servers. I know these have been defunct for quite some time, but I think that what Crytek needs to realize is why this is getting so much traction. In my opinion, it's not even because people are wildly upset at the concept of bullet drop, but simply because everyone in this community at this point knows how little testing goes into Crytek's patches. The most recent graphics bug, where you have to type something into your starting options to fix your game, and some argue the whole throwing spear itself being a good example for this. People have lost trust in the released patches actually being functional, and with how little Crytek patches during events, or in general really, people are afraid they will have to play a completely broken game for weeks, if not months. Crytek, you need to somehow reassure your fans that what you are releasing is going to work and not going to be broken or exploitable. Let the people try. One of your Reddit mods seems to be convinced it's a good change too. Why not try and convince the rest of us as well? And if it really is broken or easily exploitable, at least you will know in advance and be able to tweak some things before the relaunch of the game. No fan wants this game to fail, but I think a lot of people are scared it will. An engine update is something that an incredibly large portion of the online community, not just the Hunt community, will be looking at. A working launch with the new engine would be a dream for this game. Let your player base help you achieve it. And well, that's all from me now. This script's already longer than some of my college essays, to be frank, but I kind of wanted to voice my opinion on this topic, even if it's just so I don't have to send this as a copy-paste to all of my friends whenever they ask me what I think of this update. I hope you're doing well. If you want to, I'd appreciate any feedback on this in the comments. Thank you for listening to my rambling, and have a good hunt.